The SRAM Force eTap AXS wide gravel group set is excellent, but with a big $4,500 price tag, it comes with a high amount of expectation behind it. I have spent about the last 7 months riding on the group set, and I can safely say that it is very, very good. But there's a lot going on in this group set that prospective buyers need to know about before they decide to drop that amount of coin on a group set. Remember, a quite good gravel bike can be bought complete for less than what this costs. So this is a fairly tough one to review. There's a lot of nuance in this group set, and I'm gonna try and run through everything as best I can to help you make the best decision before you buy. So let's jump in. Before we start the review, let's talk about why this group set exists at all. eTap AXS Wide is an adaptation of regular Force eTap AXS that addresses two major limitations: insufficient tire clearance and aggressive gear range that was only suitable for flat land and fairly narrow tire dirt. So AXS Wide introduces a wider range, 10 to 36 cassette and compatible rear derailleur, widened the crankset stance by 5mm to give better tire clearance, and developed a crankset with 4330 rings and a front derailleur to go with it. All of these changes really redeemed the ecosystem for use with gravel. Previously, it was far too aggressively geared and it just couldn't accommodate large tires, two things that are super important. The changes that they have made do make a world of difference, and they have turned it into a really excellent all-round group set. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the rear derailleur and cassette are paired together, as are the front derailleur and the crankset. All of the design changes and sort of accommodating tweaks that they made mean that those parts do have to be paired together. You can pull in other things from the ecosystem, so your shifters and your batteries, and also, dropper posts and that sort of thing. Do make sure you understand that before you put in an order for all the parts and pieces that you want. Let's talk tech, because there's a lot of things about this group set that sets it apart from the others in the market. So let's talk about the app, the batteries, and the wireless of it all. I love the sort of nerdy tech ecosystem that's going on with this group set, and it does change the owning experience quite significantly compared to other group sets. Each individual component is blessed with Bluetooth connectivity, and that makes a lot of things significantly easier from setting up. All you do is hold down the pairing button and sort of everything manages to connect up and talk to each other. And then of course there is just the simplified bike building where you just bolt these components on and nothing has to run through the frame except for your hydraulic hoses. You can then use the app to independently update all the firmware and check on the battery status and all kinds of cool stuff like that. The setup and interfacing of this is easier than any other group set before. And I do think that goes a fair way to justifying some of the price point. It just makes a lot of your life easier. Now, through the app, you can do everything I just said, but you can also tweak a lot of the shift mapping and sort of change a lot of the settings in there. I won't run through what all of the individual options are because ultimately I tested them all and then I settled back on the default. For the simple reason that I want the shifting to be simple on gravel. You are often dealing with very high torque climbing and sort of lots of bumping and vibrating, and you want to know exactly what your derailleur is going to do. You especially don't want both derailleurs shifting at the same time when you're sort of groveling your way up a super steep gravel climb. But it was cool to be able to go through and test everything. I just found for my purposes, I went with the default, but there are plenty of things inside there that you can change and that I've talked about more in my written review. There's also the AXS Web platform, which has some very cool features in it. If you tether your drivetrain to your head unit, it will store all of your sort of shifting data, and that can all get uploaded into AXS Web so you can see your ride, but you can also see some very cool information on your shifting and how you use the drivetrain. I did make a full video on this feature and sort of about gravel gearing generally, which you can look at if you want more information. But what I would say is this allowed me to see the sort of very clean bell curve of gear usage. I really was spending most of my time in the middle of the cassette, but it also showed me that I used the climbing end a lot more than this sort of high speed end at the 10 end of the cassette. So for those people who really value doing a lot of climbing on gravel, you know, the proof is there. You do use that huge gear range in the 36 on the back quite a lot. The battery and charging system here is very easy and intuitive as well because you can remove the battery from the derailleurs. There is a very small and easy cradle that just has a micro USB input into it, so you can charge it off a battery, a laptop, a computer, or you can just plug it into a wall charger. It's very easy to maintain charge in the batteries because of that. I have always found that Shimano, I pay way less attention to the batteries because it's a little bit of a pain in the butt for me to have to run a cable all the way from a power source into sort of the Di2 junction box. Now, the relatively short battery life is something that people criticize this system for, but I really didn't find it to be a problem. I think ultimately it depends on the end user. How attentive you are with charging your devices in the whole rest of your life will probably indicate how attentive you're going to be charging the SRAM group set. If everything you use is always flat and needing a charge, you're probably going to shoot yourself in the foot and go out with flat batteries a lot of the time. When you do use the app regularly, and if you tether your drivetrain to your head unit, you get tons of warning about your battery life. When the batteries are low, I started getting all kinds of notifications. I got the head unit telling me, so I really don't think there's much of an excuse to be caught with a flat battery. You get plenty of warning and it's so easy to charge. Of course, Shimano's Di2 will last a lot longer. There's no getting around that, but it's also less convenient to manage. And if you don't have a D-Fly unit, you can easily forget about the battery and the charge level in it. So personally, I really enjoyed the SRAM battery system. I do have to criticize the system though for use of 2032 batteries in the shifters, which are not rechargeable and do just have to be thrown away when they're depleted. They seem to have a long battery life. I haven't had to replace any yet, and they're not close to flat, but yeah, it is a bummer and it is something you just have to deal with in using this system. Now it's time for the all-important matter of shifting and changing gears, and this group set will feel very familiar to anyone who's ridden SRAM's wireless group sets before, even all the way back to the original 11 speed. It is just unmistakably SRAM wireless, for better and for worse. Let's start with intuitive, and I do like how SRAM's single button on each side works. Simply put, press the right button and the chain moves to the right, press the left button, the chain moves to the left. Press both buttons at the same time and you will change chain rings. Now the command is to always change chain rings. It doesn't matter which one you're on, it will just change if you double press. So I did stitch myself up quite a lot of times when I didn't realize that I was already in the chain ring that I wanted. That was just something I had to readjust to after riding one by for so long, was just remembering like, oh yeah, chain rings are a very different beast. So that learning curve aside, I do very much enjoy the intuitive shifting of the system. In terms of reliability, I was always impressed with how the system just manages to shift no matter what you're doing, whether it's, shifting under way too high a load, for example. So there's really no problems there, didn't miss shifts or do anything strange. When it comes to speed though, this is not a particularly impressive group set. And it sort of feels very familiar all the way back to the 11 speed of wireless, which I remember thinking the same thing. Reliable and intuitive, but not very fast, and that's still the case through to the 12-speed generation. You particularly notice it when you're changing front chain rings. The derailleur does move quickly enough when you give it the command, but it needs time for those sort of ramping guides to kick in. So if you're going from small to large chain rings, it does feel like there's just a little bit of lag there. Dropping off from big to small, not quite so noticeable, but in this age of like really superb electronic drivetrains and also fantastic mechanical drivetrains, this group set just feels just a little bit on the slower end. Again, it's very reliable and intuitive, but it's just not going to knock your socks off in terms of getting through the cassette quickly. A couple of things with the derailleurs starting at the back. I do really like what SRAM does with the tensioning system that they use. They call it the orbit dampening system, rather than a clutch. It does manage to keep really nice tension on the chain, reducing bounce, but not really feeling super draggy, which was something I found with the Shimano GRX Di2. And even though it's a 2x system, it pretty much stopped any major problems with the chain getting thrown off or any problems like that. I did have one single time in 7 months of testing, flying over some bouncy rocks. The chain did drop from the big ring to the small ring, but that was one time. Everything else has been really good. I do wish the rear derailleur had that switch that allows you to extend the cage fully and lock it in place, because I find that nice and easy to clean the derailleur. That's really my only problem at the back there. It is a very big sort of chunky thing, can be a little bit hard to clean, so a switch to hold it in place would have been handy, but hey, it's not there, so you just deal with it. The critical thing that people need to be aware of with the front derailleur is that despite the fact that it has been pushed outboard for greater tire clearance, it's still not amazing, and it's something to think about in terms of what you want your gravel bike to be maybe in a year or two from now. The way everything is getting wider and gravel tires are getting wider, gravel frames are accommodating much wider tires, I'm not sure whether this is a fully future-proof front derailleur design. It's actually the battery that is the problem rather than the derailleur itself. Even running it with 40mm tires on a muddy day, I had a lot of crud building up behind the battery, as you can see here. Seeing it with a 650 by 50mm tire that measured at about 52mm here, you can already see that there's just not a huge amount of clearance to that battery. So do keep that in mind. If your heart is set on a 700 by 50mm tire in future, this is not going to cut it. It tops out at 45mm, and even then, I don't think you're going to have much space, judging by what I've seen with a 40mm tire. The expanded gear range is a critical feature of this group set, and it is one of its strongest points, and I've been very openly a massive fan of it to date, and I still just love it. It absolutely enriches the experience of riding gravel for me. The gear range impresses both in its sheer width, the difference between the top and the bottom, but also because it's 12 speed, the way they've spaced it out feels very smooth and natural when you're moving through the cassette. There aren't really big and sort of unintuitive jumps between the two. It just feels really tight, despite the fact it has that great span to it. So when you want to go fast, you can easily get up to 60 kilometers an hour with this without spinning too crazily. You're still gonna be at sort of 90 RPM or a little bit higher. And all the way at the other end, when you're groveling your way up stupidly steep gravel climbs, you know, you can go at 6 or 7 kilometers an hour, up 23% of slushy gravel, and you can still sort of make it happen and keep a relatively smooth pedaling cadence when you're doing it. This stuff absolutely makes a huge difference on the ride experience, and I really appreciated having that extreme end of the range. Again, going back to the shifting data that I saw in the AXS Web system, I used every gear, and I really appreciated having all of them. The group set does a pretty solid job at slowing you down. I think that SRAM has taken some steps forward in terms of power and modulation. And I'm happy to say this is the quietest disc brake system I've ever ridden from SRAM. But still, it isn't quite the top spot when it comes to gravel group sets. SRAM has taken a few steps forward in the braking department here. It is much quieter, it is very powerful, and I even got quite good wear life out of the pads during my test period. So everything's kind of lining up to be quite good. The problem is that I've ridden GRX Di2 and the brakes on that are just staggeringly good. They are the best drop bar brakes I've ever used by a long way. So SRAM would be a lot better if it wasn't for that, you know, sort of by comparison. I do really appreciate the quiet braking, having ridden a bunch of SRAM hydraulic brake systems before, and they've all got that kind of really iconic SRAM gobbling noise to them. I really didn't find that here. It crept in a little bit when I swapped out to some non-SRAM Elixir brake pads. They did get a little bit noisier, but generally if you sort of keep within the SRAM ecosystem and you have everything set up properly and you bed your brakes properly, this gives a very quiet experience. A little bit of noise creeps in when it's wet, but it is just night and day ahead of a lot of my experience with SRAM in the past. So the braking system has a ton of power, good but not amazing modulation. The Di2 again has way better modulation in the braking, but generally I'm happy with the steps forward that SRAM has taken here. It feels really on par with Shimano's road group sets for people who might have that as a point of reference. So a good job, but not the best. Now, what is the group set actually like to live with and sort of to ride with day to day? Well, I'm happy to say it was actually really fantastic. It's been one of those set and forget products for me. I haven't really had to think about it. It just seems to do its job and do its job quite well. The ultimate goal for any group set is to just do its job and make it so you don't have to think about it. And this group set has fallen into that category for me, just with a couple of small quirks. I did have a strange problem when I changed over to a new chain after about 900 kilometers because I wanted to set up that absolute black graphene lube. When I did put that new chain on, it made a really horrible noise when I was in the small chain ring. This is it. I took it to a mechanic just to make sure that nothing was going really wrong, and he confirmed that everything was fine, but it seemed like the small chain ring had just kind of meshed to the original chain. There was really almost no wear on the chain rings or any of the drivetrains, so that wasn't the issue. There was no alignment problems, so I basically just had to ride it until it went quiet, which it eventually did. Now that could indicate that that inner chain ring is perhaps a little bit on the softer side and will very quickly mesh with a chain, which could mean that it does wear out, but I am too early in the group set's lifetime to really know how long those chain rings are gonna last. So that's just something to keep an eye on and something to keep in mind if you have a similar problem. Other than that, the group set has just kind of slotted into my life in a way that I haven't really had to think about. I just go for rides, I appreciate all of the features and the way it functions, and I just really enjoy it when I'm out there. It hasn't had any mechanicals. Really the only thing that went wrong was I ran one of the derailleurs flat because I wanted to push it and see how long you had after you got critically low battery warnings. Turns out, not very long at all. So if you get that warning, charge it up. As I said before, this group set really does enrich the gravel riding experience with its sort of function and that gear range in particular. I would say the ergonomics are good, but not great. Again, the Di2 does outperform it from an ergonomics perspective. It's the best ergonomics I've ever used on that group set, but generally the SRAM is pretty good. I quite enjoy the little things like having a display on my head unit of the gearing that I was in so I could keep an eye on where I was. But that's kind of a nerdy thing that not everybody's gonna be into, but you know, if you have the feature, you should definitely use it. And other than that, I don't have a lot to report. It just kind of slotted in and works, which you would hope it does for 4,500 Australian dollars. The booming gravel market means that there's some hot competition, especially among group sets, with both Shimano and Campagnolo coming out with their own options. The direct competition is obviously GRX Di2, which I can talk about my experiences with, but there's also some in-house competition from SRAM itself. So from my experience with GRX Di2, I can tell you that GRX Di2 has better ergonomics. I would say the shifting is a little bit better, and I would say that the braking is quite a lot better. The battery life is also longer, and there won't be any problems with tire clearance on the Shimano side. But SRAM has Shimano beat in a few other ways. The gear range is both wider and it's 12 speed, which does make a huge difference. The wireless features are fantastic on SRAM. You're not going to get that on Shimano without adding a D-Fly into it, and even then you're not going to have exactly the same features and functions that you're going to have with the SRAM. There's also a really interesting ecosystem on the SRAM side where you can swap parts in and out from mountain biking and all kinds of stuff like that, which isn't quite as easy as Shimano. They do tend to like to keep their group sets as closed ecosystems, although people are managing to find ways around that now, and it seems like Shimano is opening up. So as for Shimano versus SRAM, I've used both. They both have strengths and they both have weaknesses. It's really about what you value in a group set more. Interestingly, on the SRAM side, there's a very compelling reason to consider a Force Eagle setup. This is a friend of mine who has a 46 tooth on the front and then has a 10 to 52 Eagle cassette and rear derailleur on the back. And that gives him a faster top end, not quite as low a climbing gear, but if you run a 44 tooth chainring on the front, you get a very similar range to the eTap AXS Wide. Of course, the jumps are going to be a lot bigger and you don't have the sort of nice riding experience of a 2x, but you also get a much cheaper group set because there are less parts. You also aren't going to have any issues with tire clearance because there is no front derailleur. So I do think that is worth pointing out, that a lot of the virtues of the SRAM system don't have to be tied to this particular group set. If you want that really excellent gear range and a lot of the virtues of wireless, you can get that for cheaper within SRAM's own offerings. Now some people might be wondering about Campagnolo Ekar, but it's mechanical, it's 1x13, and I haven't used it, so I really don't have anything to say about it at this stage. Let's tie this all together then, and as I said at the top, this isn't the simplest group set to review. There's a lot of complexity and nuance going on here. It is a big investment, it comes with a big price tag, and thus it should carry big expectations from the buyers. And ultimately, it depends on what you want out of your gravel group set and whether you've taken the time to sort of understand the potential strengths and weaknesses within it. It's always tough to review things that are at the top tier of the market because you're so high into the area of diminishing returns, especially in an age where there are so many excellent group sets that are a lot cheaper than these. So, as far as whether it's worth it, that's something that the comment section is going to have their own thoughts on anyway. What I will say is that this group set most certainly belongs at the very top tier of the market. It also does enough to justify being bought over Shimano GRX Di2. They are fighting over a very similar space, and I do think that both of them justify being bought over the other. It's just a matter of knowing what each one offers you and what you value more. There's also a major philosophical divide between Shimano and SRAM with these gravel group sets. Shimano has taken the best of what they already knew and kind of refined it into a package that is excellent and has a great usable experience. They took 11-speed assets and what they'd learned from their road and mountain bike group sets and kind of combined it all together, and it is a very, very good group set system. SRAM, on the other hand, has been far more ambitious and innovative. They have pushed the market forwards. They've gone 12-speed, they've gone wireless, and those things are really, really awesome. The end point of that innovation is that you have the best tech crammed into a group set, but not necessarily the best of everything involved with being a group set. So really, if you have the money to buy at this end of the market, do your research to know what each system offers you and ultimately what it is that you value the most. And that is where I'm gonna try and end it here, guys. Thank you so much if you came all the way through the video here. Couple of things, there is a written review on La Velocita that I've linked to in the description below. The other thing, this was a review group set that was sent by SRAM Global. They have absolutely no say in what I say about it. It is a fully independent review, and I have tried to give you absolutely all of the information that you need to know whether you should buy it. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to stick around the channel. I've got nerdy stuff going on everywhere. Be sure to ride safe, stay healthy, and I will see you next time.